they would present one another with gifts. Even right now, if Biden were to go and visit Putin in real life, though we know yesterday or the day before they met digitally, they would have presented gifts to one another. And this is the beginning of diplomacy, right? I'm hoping that if I give you a gift, I can crack into your heart and possibly change what might go down, right? So it's right now within the State Department and whatever, and the Russian equivalent, which probably is the foreign ministry in other nations, something like that. There are people whose job it is to know our culture and to know what is the right gift at this time in the history of the United States with Joe Biden as president. What's the best gift? He would have done the same thing if he were to meet Putin in person, right? So Jacob sends his servants ahead of him with gifts, which is a political move, and his family goes before him as well. And it says, left alone, according to 32:24, Jacob is met by a man who wrestled with him all night. The story of Jacob wrestling with, in quotation marks, an angel, because we're still not 100% sure what happened. We got some good clues. Here is what the story tells us. Jacob is left alone. A man wrestles with him until daybreak. The man tore a muscle in Jacob's thigh when he saw he couldn't defeat Jacob. The man said, let me go because the dawn is breaking. Jacob said, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. The man changed Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel because you have struggled with God and with men and you have won. Jacob asked the man his name, but the man would not tell him. The man blessed him. Jacob names the place Peniel or Penuel because I have seen God face to face and my life is saved. Jacob limps after tearing his thigh muscle. For this reason, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle. Now, this is what I want you all to do, just a little something different than what we normally do. I want to ask you to read in quiet, and we'll post this, please, on Facebook Live and in the chat. I'm asking you to take the next few minutes to read the entirety of Genesis 32, all right? Read all of Genesis 32. So what I'd ask you to do is read that now, and when you are done, just put a thumbs up or put in the chat that I'm finished. And then once I believe that the great majority of us have completed reading it, then we'll continue our discussion. So if you would please right now, and I'm going to join you, spend the next few minutes reading the entirety of Genesis 32. And I'm going to go on mute as we do that. I think some of us are moving to a conclusion. I've got 12:16. I'll give us until about 12:18, 12:19. A few more minutes. Please don't rush. All right, for those of you who still need to read, keep reading. But for those of you who have not, I want to facilitate a discussion. I just want to ask, and let's do some just talking. What just happened? What did you just read? I want to hear from a number of you. Just jump in. What did you just read? What happened? What is this?
Okay. Jacob is very afraid.
Say more about his fear, Sister Marcia, and how you think the text is clear about that.
It said he feared, he was afraid. Yeah. And he had every right to be for all the wrong he had done.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. I said he must have felt very guilty. He's got all those animals coming out like that.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk, and I'm gonna come to both of you. So Sister Leandra, Sister Marcia, you say he's afraid. Andrew, you say he's feeling guilty. How many of us have ever felt guilt before? and how many of us have thought about what we must do to appease the parties we have wronged? Mm-hmm. How many of us have gone to great lengths, not only to appease, but possibly to reconcile parties whom we have wronged? Some probably still in the process. I had the opportunity to speak before the National Association of Attorneys General, and they were talking about reconciliation. But the problem with reconciliation is you can have no reconciliation without repair. And the word reparations comes from that. You can't really be serious about reconciling unless you repair what's broken. And what you see in Jacob, and I'm going to ask Sister Marcia, Sister Leandra, do you think that Jacob has a spirit of repair? Do you think it's fair to say that? Sister Marcia, Sister Leandra?
I think it's repair out of fear. I don't know that Jacob was really sorry, but.
Sister Marcia, you hard.
Yeah, it took him so long to come to this point too, because he could have started his apology sooner.
Okay. So the Jacob apology tour could have done earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and you know what? Let me tell you something I had not noticed. If you go to the first verse of chapter 32, Jacob went on his way, and God met him. That was interesting. On this very fearful journey, God is with Jacob and beings that serve God. But there's something else. Look at verse 9, which made me laugh out loud because I've been there with Jacob. Jacob is on this journey of fear and challenge. Look at the prayer he prays, y'all. And Jacob said, "Oh God,
he's pleading.
Abraham and God of my father Isaac, oh Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good." Why do you think I laughed at that? What do you see there? What is Jacob ultimately saying to God?
He said, "You got me into this, get me out."
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Now I messed up. You're the one who told me to do this. Now I remind you. Now, how many of us have done it? You had to remind God. Now, wait a minute. God, I need to remind you that I believe I am here because of you. Therefore, don't forget that. Let's keep going. Sister Janine, you were going to jump. Go ahead.
Well, I need to be, what in the world? I'm sorry to ask this, but what did Jacob do? Didn't he steal Esau's birthright?
He did.
Is that all he did? I don't mean to be,
No, no, he did some other stuff. Who'd like to share some of the other wonderful things that Brother Jacob did?
because I don't remember.
He stole the birthright, which is enough. But what else did he do? He swindled his father-in-law, right?
Oh.
Right. But really, Dr. Boland, tell us what happened with his father-in-law.
He captivated the father's sheep. He told him that he would give him let him take the ones that had the mark on them. And so he really built up his herd of sheep and given the father-in-law lesser than what he had. And so he built up his store of animals based on taking out the good ones that he thought that were crippled or whatever, or had a black spot on them. And then he became more wealthy than the father-in-law did. Yes.
So this is what's interesting. Thanks for that question, Sister Janine. As Reverend Moy in the chat, he's a shiesty individual. What is interesting here is that Israel lifts up as its key ancestor this very shiesty individual. What's interesting to me is how America lifts up its ancestors as pure without blemish. But what is recorded here is a very human ancestor. And I think because of that, you kind of get a different present feel among people according to how they tell their story through ancestry. It's very interesting. Sister Anne Marie, go ahead. I want to hear from y'all. Again, the question is, what did you just read? What was this about? Go ahead.
I really appreciate Sister Marcia for telling me, because I had no idea what I was reading. This story, I have a question, which is, how do we know that the man that he wrestled with in the scriptures that I was reading says it was a man? How do we know that was God?
We're going to get to that. As I said in the
we're not there. Okay.
We're going to get. No, it's a great question, and I want you to put it on the table. We're not 100% sure, but we're pretty sure because of some of the clues, and we will get to those clues. There are clues here that lead us in that direction. But great question, Sister. Would you go ahead and tell us? No, go ahead, Sister Emery. Go ahead if you have something.
No, I'm just really confused too. Is that when I read the last thing I read was that the Israelite people don't eat something because of that's where the hip joint was. And right. I'm thinking, well, if the dude was that deceptive and conniving and wicked, less than holy, why in the world would he be given the blessing, one? And then two, what is so important about his stuff? Maybe I need to read a little more. Let me hush, because I'll probably get the answers later, I'm sure. Well,
we'll get to some of it, but I think he gets the blessing because he's crooked. The reason is because all of us are crooked and we get the blessing.
Yeah, but they named the whole nation after this dude. This dude does not represent who I would want to be called by. If I were Israelite,
possibly, but I would argue, I don't know if you were to name a nation after me, that'd be a problem. I mean, maybe you're in better shape than I am.
No. I'm not saying that. It's not about me. I'm not saying I am, but I just, keep listening. I like you pushing back. It's a very human story. And we're dealing with saints in as much as they're not perfect, but they keep being led and guided by God. So there is something, as I said, even in my prayer today, about the dogged pursuit that God engages when it comes to human beings, because God is trying to make something out of Jacob. At least that's the way we can read the story. Same way I believe that God is trying to make something out of us. But I think it's very important to stop now and give Sister Marion a chance to tell us why we should not use the word shiesty. And I think I know better, but Sister Marion, go right ahead, because we want to not impugn people with our language. So go ahead.
I used it once talking about something with a Jewish friend, and she said, Marion, that's a derogatory term used to signify that Jews were crooked, corrupt, and would swindle you and would charge high interest rates. And the only reason we went into insurance and that line of work was because we were kept out of other areas. So it's not a term that she wanted to hear me use.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I want to honor that. Sister Jean, I'm going to mute you because I want to hear from others who've not spoken. So let me share one thing. I think it's also interesting that my dad put in the chat, and I hadn't read this as closely either, Dad. I appreciate what you said, is that Jacob also is shrewd militarily.
Yes.
So if you notice, he said, now I'm going to send this group first and then space it and send the next group. Then when you get to the next chapter, when he gets close to Esau, he sends his concubines and their children first, then his wives and their children. So he's with everything. Okay, I'm more willing to lose these people than these people. He sends them in different directions. So I appreciate that. I had not read that closely. That you're right, that he's very strategic. Sister Linda and then Dr. Bowling. What'd you read, Sister Linda?
It just made me think about how people try to make reparations for things they want to do it the way that they want to do it. And it's not necessarily the way that it's going to be received by the other things. When he finally gets to his brother's like, no, we're good. And I really don't need this stuff. I'm doing well. And, he continues to insist this is what you take. But his whole message is, I want to give you reparations the way that I want to give them to you. And I think that's still something that's very human today.
So I want to do for you what I want to do. And would you say then, Sister Linda, the more moral thing, I don't know what the word, I'll use the word moral for lack of a better term, is to reconcile, is for the wronged party to set the parameters of the repair? Would you argue that?
Yes. Because if he had probably just came to his brother and said, I am sorry for what I did to you. What I did was not correct. But I don't think that he believes that. He believes that he did the right thing. But,
It seems like Jacob's ethic is do unto others before they do unto you.
Exactly.
I think that he's not the only one who lives by that creed. Dr. Bowling, what do you think?
Well, I was thinking sort of like that, because he kept saying to the servants who he sent out, make sure that you tell him that your servant Jacob is behind you, to make sure that they would tell his brother, your servant Jacob is behind us, so to make himself more humble. I am not trying to come and overpower you or conquer you, but I am your servant, make sure you say that. So he stressed that.
Dr. Bowling, another thing, what you're making clear is this, that now Jacob does not go first himself, he sends others. And many people, he sends his own children and wives.
Yeah.
So this dude is, this is a pretty, this is a tough guy, but you can read also some of the people that we valorize and lionize. First of all, I think if this story is to help us, he's crafty. We got to realize there's some Jacob in us. And you don't get the wealth and power of the United States without a whole lot of Jacobing. And there's a whole lot of Jacobing in the history of this nation. There's Jacobing in our individual stories as well. Let me hear from a few others who have not spoken. What did you just read? Great stuff. Who's not spoken? But TJ.
Jacob judged his brother to be the same type of person or impressed by the same type of things that he was. Jacob was a big time capitalist. thought his brother would be impressed by all of those things, you know, the capitalism of the day, because that's what he would have been impressed by.
Wow. Wow. Let me tell y'all this. Will y'all like move in with me and help me when I got to write sermons? This stuff, I never thought about that. You're exact. Brother TJ, let me ask you to unmute again, because I really, you have hit on something profound. I often deal with people like that, right? I assume they're going to react the way I react or be moved by the things that move me. If you caught that, I think that must mean that you try to do things differently. What practices can we engage to be a little better at that? Because I need to get better at that.
By asking the question, what is my pure motive in doing what I do? Because you're exactly right. There's some Jacob in all of us. All of us are knowingly or unknowingly manipulative from time to time.
And it ties in with someone, I'm forgetting, said that maybe, I mean, so the story is so mixed up, because if you look at the way, so I'll just tell you this, I watch Gunsmoke reruns. Like my mother and wife laugh at me and my dad, but I really like the black and white Gunsmoke reruns. I think I like the black and white better than color. But last night there was a story on about the Quint character, who is played by Burt Reynolds. You know, he's the town blacksmith, but he's half Native and half white. And so there's a story last night about a white colonel and his wife in the U.S. Army, and the daughter just did not trust Quint because he was Native American. You just can't be trusted. And I just take that as she didn't know much about him, his character, but and so with what you just said, I am wondering, because of the way the United States tells our story and the way many of us tell our personal stories, you demonize we unrelentingly demonize whole groups of people. But in this story, the descendants of Jacob are the good guys. When you read further, the descendants of Esau, who I think, and you all check behind me, I think his descendants are known as the Edomites, I think. But what they show here is humanity and grace in their enemy. Because Esau represents, it's the bloodline, but it's a family fight. And they show Esau to be more gracious, because no one says the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Esau. We say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So they still place in central ancestral claim on Jacob, who's really messed up like many and most of us are. But the story shines light on the graciousness and godliness of Esau. And Esau is the one whose birthright's been stolen. He has every reason to utterly destroy Jacob. It's just weird. I mean, what good is there? So right now, as the US and China are ramping up, are we going to tell stories about the graciousness of the Chinese? No. Are the Chinese telling stories about the graciousness of Americans? Not much. There's a lot here. There's a lot here. Who else wants to speak who's not spoken? Brother Brees, go ahead, please. I think you're muted, Brother Brees. I can't hear you.
I guess one thought I had is just that God had made some promises to Jacob about what was going to happen going forward. But with his fears, both with his father-in-law behind him and his brother in front of him, it was clear to me with his fears that his faith was not very strong in terms of how it was going to work out for him. And he was taking measures just to sort of protect himself, not feeling that somehow or another God had his back. But that's, I guess, because of all of the things that he had done, I guess he just had every reason to feel that he deserved whatever he was going to get from either his father-in-law or his brother.
You know, it's fascinating, Brother Bruce. I think many of you either heard the aphorism that I'm about to share verbatim or heard a similar version of it. But if you live right, you won't have to look behind you, look over your shoulder, right? So this brother has lived in such a way that he can't look behind himself and he can't look forward. He's got trouble on every hand, much of it because of his own craftiness. But this is interesting how names play into this. The name Israel, so the name Jacob means supplanter, trickster, right? But again, this is why this stuff ties in with older stories of the divine. And I ask Reverend Moya or Gioni, for those of you who want to follow this trail, put in a link so that those who don't know much about African theology, about Legba, the trickster god, that there are multiple ancient strains. I mean, the story of Jacob is in the line of the stories of trickster gods, of trickster deities, of trickster ancestors who are key. So in many of the stories that you would read about Legba in African theology, these trickster gods often live and do their work at crossroads. It's fascinating stuff, right? So they're doing their trickery at crossroads, Legba. There you go, Legba. So look up Legba and read that stuff. And there's a lot of Legba in Jacob. These are very, very old stories. And yeah, that's the spider, right, Gioni? That tale. And there is the signifying and all of that stuff. So you see what I'm giving you here, and I promise you that Dr. Judy knows about this stuff, but she has to be careful, doesn't have the time to give it all to you. But I want you to see that in the trickster, there is something that God wants to use. Now, stay with me, because remember, Saul was a murderer and Moses was a murderer. Like, God has a way of inviting the most morally challenged into God's work. One of the things that the great Gardner Taylor said in one of his sermons is that I am clear that if God had not called me to, I'm a scoundrel who preaches, but I would have been a major scoundrel among scoundrels if God hadn't put me in this line of work. I mean, it is, and so we have to be careful, because if we go too far in moralizing, we will cut off God's ability to use anybody, including ourselves. Does that make sense? But if we go too far in saying anything goes, that's another problem. So in holding together the trickster and the divine possibilities in Jacob, we are holding together the trickster and the divine possibility in us. So let's hold on to all that. So you see here, a central figure is Asu Elegbara, the divine trickster, whose attributes are described in prose and poetry in West Africa. So you hear a lot about this. One of my professors was clearly connecting Jacob and Legba and these ancient stories of tricksters and how the divine works within trickster types of things, right? Because I would argue the prophets say that God tricked them into prophesying. They say, we didn't want to do this, but God tricked us, right? Is God one way, what some of the Hebrew scholars say that God tantalized or seduced, that God tricked. I didn't want to do this, but you tricked me. So the argument here is, and also I would argue with God calling Abraham, which we discussed earlier. God didn't tell Abraham everything he was going to have to go through. So there are elements. So the question is this: are you telling the truth when you know everything, but you just offer some? Is it not within the character of the divine to withhold from us I am clear I want God to remain in the business of withholding or trickster or whatever, because I know I can't handle all this stuff. Do y'all want God to just give you I am clear. Maybe y'all can handle it, but I know that I cannot, right? So there's a lot here that's exciting, but let's try to move on. So some of the questions that you all ask, if you go to page 24, the brief account presents many questions. Where does the man who wrestles with Jacob come from? We don't know that. Why do they wrestle? We don't necessarily know that. How do they wrestle all night? What kind of strength does Jacob have? Why does Jacob ask for a blessing? At what point do we discern that this man is otherworldly? There's so much here. And the reason I want to lift up these questions is if you pay attention to other texts and give them as much attention as we're giving Genesis 32, often what you will find, exactly, I was going to say that, the Sister Linda, I know I can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. I'm clear about that. So when you read many passages, what you will find is there are as many questions in those passages as there are here. But we fill in the blanks without saying that we're filling in blanks. Every time you hear me talk, if you pay attention, I'm filling in blanks without telling you that I'm filling in blanks. Because the scripture does not tell you everything. When we get into this Christmas story, preachers are going to be doing a lot of what people who study literature call omniscient narrating. Y'all know what an omniscient narrator is? Somebody knows. What's an omniscient narrator? It's a narrator who knows everything. And no one knows everything. I, as a preacher, have to become an omniscient narrator because the text doesn't tell us everything about how Joseph was feeling, how Mary was feeling. And so we have to intuit by clues. And hopefully our filling in the blanks don't do violence to the Spirit's intent for the scripture being read and, more importantly, being lived to the end of justice and shared abundance for all of us together. And so in addition to these questions, the text intentionally, now this is what Judy Fentress-Williams is saying, muddles identity. In Genesis 32-27, there are no proper names used, only the pronoun he. It is not until verse 28 when he answers Jacob. Then we are clear on who he is asking for a blessing. Interpreters have long debated the identity of the man in the story. And Sister Anne-Marie, this comes to your question. But the suggestion is that Jacob wrestles with a supernatural force, one that displaces his hip socket with his hand and has the authority to change his name. Now, this is interesting because this is included in the Hebrew people's literature, very much Columbo fashion, right? For those of us who are old school, or Law and Order fashion for today, or Sherlock Holmes, whatever your pleasure may be, Easy Rollins, whoever you choose, right? The clue is that in the Hebrew understanding, in the Hebrew cosmology or way of ordering the world, only God has the power to change names, right? Only God has that power. Then here's another clue that I have used in this room when we have studied together. When Jacob asks, "What is your name?" the being says, "I ain't gonna tell you my name." Now that is a very clear clue that this is a divine being, because the Hebrew people do not say the word of God. When you see in the text what we pronounce is Yahweh, they would never pronounce Yahweh. What we say Yahweh is, again, we know they say Adonai. And I always listen to Hanukkah stories during this time of year. I love Hanukkah stories. So if you've never listened to Hanukkah Lights on NPR, Reverend Moya, Gioni, drop that in the chat. Hanukkah Lights on NPR. It'll be 50 minutes of the best stories you've heard. It's beautiful because it helps us to understand ancient storytelling. And the Bible is simply that in many ways that God breathes upon. But I'll say this, There's a story that they recently told about a little girl in Hebrew school and a game. Now follow me. A game that children play in Hebrew school. Anything that has the name of God on it, written on it, cannot be discarded. And so what they do in Hebrew school is they write the name of God on paper and stuff it in a kid's pocket, or stuff it in a kid's backpack, or put it in their book. And so the kids play the game about, all right, I got to give this to someone else. I got to get God off my hands. The only way that you can care for the name of God once it has been written is that it has to be buried. You have to bury the name of God. So I told you all this story that I was studying with one of my rabbi friends, and the book that we were reading from, the Hebrew Holy Book, hit the ground. And she picked it up and began to kiss it and to pray a prayer that is prescribed for if you drop a book with the name of God on the floor, what you have to do and how you have to pray to be able to care for the book, because the name of God is contained within it. So I say all that to say the name of God is taken seriously. For us, we just throw the name around. You know, God, give me a parking space. God, give me a raise. God, give me a husband. God, give me a cupcake. We don't care. There is very little holiness attached to how we treat the name of God. And so when Jacob asks, what is your name? What I'm thinking, Sister Anne-Marie, is Jacob knows, wait a minute, I'm not just wrestling with the regular cat here. I got to figure this out. And I am clear that if this person or entity tells me their name, I have a certain amount of power over it. That's another thing, that uttering the name of God, or when someone knows your name, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable. If I'm in a crowd of people and there's two people working to kill me, you know, a good way for me to be dead is if someone knows my name. Because I was at Union Station the other day picking Dana up. Let's say I'm walking in a crowd at Union Station and somebody yells out, Bill, and then I stop and somebody comes and stabs me. Because I've stopped to see, I mean, that's an old cloak and dagger game. Knowing names, that's why you notice in spycraft, you have to use aliases, identity theft. If you're a spy for the US government, you don't go around saying, hey, I'm Bill Lamar, here's my social security number. That's not the way it works. So there is a power in the revelation of identity. And so the clues we have here is that Jacob then later names the place. Here is, at least from Jacob's understanding, right? At least from Jacob's understanding, he names the place Face of God because he believes that he has encountered the divine. Now, we could wrestle with it, fight with it, agree or disagree, but the same way when Dr. Bowling was telling us that beautiful story last week about her encounter with God as Tyrone was transitioning, I believe Dr. Bowling when she says that was a God encounter. I am going to believe Jacob here. But it's not clear exactly if he saw God's face. And here's another thing. We know that the Hebrews, not only the Hebrews, believe that you could not see the face of God and live, which is why in that Exodus passage which we studied, God hides Moses in the cleft of the rock and says, you can look at my backside, you can look at my hind parts, but you cannot look in my face. Now, again, this is a way narratively, literarily, scripturally, to speak about the holiness of God in juxtaposition with the Jacobness of human beings, right? I just made up a word, right? So let me stop right there because I've said a lot. Just one person really quickly, what are you thinking? Somebody wants to jump in. What are you thinking? Let me see what y'all put in chat here. Make sure I haven't lost anything. Yep. This is the reason Sister Debbie says she doesn't write God in journals, identity theft. Gioni knows if anybody calls me John, which is also, if somebody really wanted to kill me in Union Station, they would call me Billy. Because only people who knew me up until the time I was 12, family, close friends, call me Billy. If you call me Billy, if you call me Bill, I might keep pacing. But if you call me Billy, it's a dead stop. I'm just totally done. You know, I'm a frog sitting on the log. You got me. So for all of the problems in this text, as Judy Fentress-Williams says, this story arrests our imagination because there is a divine encounter between Jacob and the divine. And he gets a new name, unlike his grandfather's, which speaks to his future and acknowledges his past. What is the new name? The new name is Israel. And y'all, I love this. I talk about this all the time. I think about it. God's people are not named those who praise and worship without ceasing. God's people are not named the honest ones. God's people are not named the rich ones, the beautiful ones. The name Yisrael means those who contend with God, who wrestle with God, who struggle with God. Well, and Sister Anne Marie, I understand what you're saying. I am with you as well. I have a problem with chosenness, and I got a problem with it because those who are not chosen, it never works out very well for them. Now, many of my teachers would disagree with me on this, and I'm still refining it, but I believe humanity is chosen. What I also believe is if you read the myths of any group, they're going to call themselves chosen, right? If we were to be able to trace our lineages back to wherever we come from and whoever those people are, they've got some story about how they're better than the person down the street.
Yeah,
right?
but the Israelites are in the nation that we now recognize as Israel is in the pocket of the United States of America, which is not a Judeo-Christian nation. That's problematic for me.
Yeah.
If your capitalist nation of the United States of America is causing as much havoc as they are causing, and you, Israel, claim to be the chosen ones of God, that's problematic for the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll be quiet.
No, I don't want you to be quiet, because remember when we read, and we knew this before we read it, but she helped us, we read Kelly Brown Douglas's Stand Your Ground. We are clear that the current nation of Israel is doing very evil things. And that very evil stuff that they are doing is funded by our tax dollars. What they are doing to Palestinians is ungodly, and they know it. They know it because they know these stories better than we do. They know it because but what you will find is even in this nation, we read about this, we all have our stories of God chose us. I mean, the Ronald Reagan was playing to American sense of chosenness when he talked about the shining city on the hill. That's nothing but the American narrative of being chosen by God. But here's the thing, chosen nations and this is where we have to talk about the political and the personal and how they intersect. Chosen nations lift up a morality, but when it is convenient to subvert the morality, they'll do it. So we're supposed to be about liberty and justice until it doesn't serve our purpose. And the same thing is true often about us as individuals. We say that we're about what is good, what is right, what is honest for us as individuals until it costs us too much. And then we put the morality over and into a corner and do what we want to do in the moment. So I'm clear, implicating nation states is different than implicating individuals, but nation states are comprised of individuals. And to push beyond that, the ordering of human affairs by nation states is only 500 or 600 years old. And what many people are arguing now is that the nation state is going to collapse. The human beings are in the very process now of reordering ourselves away from the mythologies of the nation states, because 1,000, 1,200 years ago, the world was not ordered the way that it is ordered, and things are always changing. And so you're exactly right, Sister Ann. My problem with this story is the way that Americans and others have taken it, and the Jewish folk have taken it to say we can now use this story to do whatever we want to do, that we are chosen. and that we then can do whatever we wish to do, because whatever we say, we can place upon it the imprimatur of the divine, the name of God. Therefore, not only does my might make right, but my might proves my chosenness, which means I can do whatever I want to with you, because ultimately my strength is the result of my righteousness. Now, we all know that the strength of the Jewish nation currently and the strength of America is not due to any righteousness at all. It is due to the exact opposite, because current Israel expelled and people who were living there the same way they had been expelled in Germany to carve out the state. So then the question becomes, when do we stop the trickery? When do we stop the killing so that there is something possible for us beyond the bloodshed and beyond the looking over the shoulder? Right? Now, Sister Linda is right. Thank you for reminding me. At the end, if you go to chapter 33, they meet in peace. The boys, takes a long way to get there. It takes a long way to get there. And so thank you all. Anybody have a last word quickly? Because I got to get out of here at 1 o'clock. What are y'all thinking? And let me also please be in prayer for the family of Ruby Joyce, whose funeral is later on today in Virginia. Anybody, what are you thinking? It's messy. Jacob's messy, we are messy, and pray for Sister Lucille, whose nephew died. Let me have this last word, and it comes from Adam Clayton Powell, whom my dad saw when he was an undergrad at Fort Valley. And he probably got it from someone else. But God hits straight licks with crooked sticks. God hits straight licks with crooked sticks. And, Brother TJ, the only sticks God has at God's disposal are crooked sticks. That's me, and that's you. God bless you all. We'll see you later on. Thank you for your time.